What kind of 13-year-old stands in front of Judge Caprio, looks straight at the bench, and says something so powerful that a packed courtroom forgets how to breathe? Drop a comment telling us what you think a child that young could possibly say to stop an entire room cold. Because before this hearing was over, justice, anger, mercy, and heartbreak were all about to collide in a way nobody in Providence would ever forget. Hit that subscribe button if you believe one moment can change a life forever. Like this video if you believe kids can make terrible mistakes and still deserve one chance to become better. And share this with someone who needs to see what real justice looks like when the truth finally breaks through all the noise. It was 9:17 on a gray Tuesday morning, October 14, 2025, in Providence Municipal Court, Courtroom 3, the room with the worn oak benches, the brass clock that ran 2 minutes fast, and the camera crews that sometimes lingered longer than expected whenever Judge Frank Caprio was on the bench. Outside, a cold rain tapped against the stone windows of the courthouse on Dorrance Street. Inside, people whispered in low voices, papers rustled, shoes squeaked against tile, and the dull click of the courtroom door kept slicing through the tension. Then the bailiff called the next case. Case number PM 25-18473, he said. City of Providence versus Mateo Rivera. Heads turned immediately. Because the boy walking toward the defense table didn't look like somebody who had wandered into the wrong room. He looked like somebody trying very hard not to look scared. Mateo Rivera was 13 years old, 5'2", all sharp elbows and clenched jaw, wearing a black Nike Tech hoodie with the zipper pulled up too high, faded jeans, and a pair of white Jordan 4s that had once been expensive and were now badly scuffed at the toes. His hair was cut close on the sides and uneven on top, like somebody at home had done it with clippers and no mirror. His face was young, but the expression on it was not. He had that look some kids develop too early. A look that says, if I act like nothing hurts me, maybe nobody will know where to stab. At the prosecutor's table sat Assistant City Solicitor Denise Callahan, neat navy suit, silver-framed glasses, legal pad lined up exactly parallel to the edge of the desk. Next to Mateo was Public Defender Marco Vega, 36, tired eyes, charcoal tie slightly crooked, a man who had spent enough years in courtrooms to know which clients needed strategy and which ones first needed someone to believe they were still reachable. In the gallery sat people who had no reason to care about a routine traffic matter, but they cared now. An elderly man in a Red Sox cap leaned forward. A young law student from Brown opened her notebook. A mother waiting on her own parking ticket held her son's hand a little tighter. And near the back sat three people whose faces carried the same tense, wounded expectation. Naomi Bell, Samir Patel, Evelyn Brooks. By the time Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file, the room already felt different. Mr. Rivera, he said calmly, how old are you? Mateo shrugged once, barely lifting his shoulders. 13. That one word hit the room harder than it should have. 13 sounded different when attached to a child standing at a defense table in traffic court, facing citations for operating a motor vehicle without a license, reckless driving, failure to stop after property damage, and operating an unregistered vehicle on a public roadway at 5:42 in the morning. Judge Caprio glanced at the paperwork again. You are 13 years old, he repeated, slower this time, and you were driving a 2011 Honda Accord westbound on Broad Street before sunrise. Mateo looked down, then back up, jaw tight. Yes, sir. There was a soft gasp from somewhere in the gallery. Somebody whispered, Jesus. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Do you understand how serious that is? Mateo shifted his weight. His right hand stayed buried in the pocket of his hoodie. It's not like I robbed a bank. That did it. The reaction rolled through the room in waves. A sharp inhale, a muttered wow. One woman covered her mouth. Prosecutor Callahan's eyebrows lifted just a fraction, the way they do when a defendant accidentally hands the court a worse impression than any evidence ever could. Even Marco Vega closed his eyes for half a second, like a man silently begging the ceiling for patience. Judge Caprio stared at Mateo, not angry, not theatrical, just still. And that stillness was worse. "Son," he said, "you are too young to understand this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Arrogance does not make a person stronger. It only makes the fall louder." Mateo didn't answer, but his mouth tightened. His eyes flicked toward the gallery for a split second and back again. It was a tiny movement, but Judge Caprio saw it. Everybody did. Like this video. If you believe that sometimes the first thing a courtroom reveals isn't guilt, it's pain hiding behind attitude. Prosecutor Callahan stood. "Your Honor, the city intends to show surveillance footage from 2 cameras, body cam footage from the responding officer, photographs of the damage, and written statements from the affected parties." Judge Caprio nodded. "All right." Callahan lifted a remote, and on the monitor to the judge's left, grainy pre-dawn footage from a corner market on Broad Street appeared. Time stamp: 5:41:52 a.m. Rain-dark pavement. Streetlights still on. A silver city bus in the distance. Then a blue-gray Honda Accord entered frame too fast, tires cutting through a puddle, headlights bouncing as the driver overcorrected near the curb. The courtroom grew quiet enough to hear the heating vent rattle. The Honda swerved around a double-parked delivery van, missed clipping a mailbox by inches, then lurched back toward the lane. A metal flower display outside Patel Family Market exploded into motion as the car's passenger side mirror hit it. Buckets toppled. White mums and orange marigolds scattered across the sidewalk. A woman in a reflective crossing guard jacket stumbled backward, slipped on wet leaves, and went down hard on one knee. A chorus of gasps filled the room. And the Honda did not stop. It kept going. Just 3 seconds later, the video caught the rear corner of the car scraping the parked Toyota Corolla of one Evelyn Brooks, tearing the bumper and sending the side mirror spinning into the street. The sound on the footage was muffled, but in the courtroom everyone imagined it anyway. The metallic crack, the plastic snap, the sickening scrape, that ugly sound that tells you somebody somewhere just made a mistake too fast to take back. Mateo kept his face flat, too flat. Callahan switched to a second camera farther down Broad, near the pharmacy at the corner of Public Street. The same Honda rolled through a blinking red without fully stopping, tires hissing on wet asphalt, then vanished. When the monitor went black, it felt like the room had gotten smaller. "Your Honor," Callahan said, "the city further submits body cam footage from Officer Lena Donnelly, who located the vehicle approximately 6 blocks away at 5:49 a.m. outside the closed entrance of Harbor Community Pharmacy." The screen flickered again. This time the footage was shakier, brighter, police lights, rain on the lens, a patrol car's headlights cutting across the back of the Honda, the driver's door opening, a small figure stepping out. "Mateo." You could hear Officer Donnelly's voice. "Hands where I can see them, now." Then Mateo's voice, younger than he looked in person but hard, practiced. "I didn't do nothing." "Who taught you to drive?" "Nobody." "Where is your license?" "I'm 13. Even on the recording, that line made people react. A few nervous laughs, then silence again. Officer Donnelly moved the camera toward the front of the car. The hood was warm, steam rising in the cold rain. The bumper was cracked. One mirror hung loose. There was mud up the side panels. On the front passenger seat sat a crushed paper bag with a pharmacy logo, unopened. "Why didn't you stop after the collision?" the officer asked. "I said I didn't do nothing." Then the body cam caught something else, just for half a second. In the back seat behind the driver, a small pink backpack with a cartoon butterfly keychain. Next to it, A child-size inhaler spacer. Bright yellow. Callahan paused the video there. For the first time all morning, the room shifted in a different direction. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Marco Vega looked up sharply. Even Mateo's face changed for the briefest moment before he locked it down again. Callahan turned toward the bench. Your Honor, that detail becomes relevant shortly. That was when people in the gallery started whispering not about the driving, but about who else might have been in that car. And whether the truth was just beginning. Share this with someone who thinks every case is simple from the outside, because what happened next changed the entire direction of that courtroom. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Mr. Rivera, he said, was there someone else in the vehicle? Mateo stared at the table. No. The answer came too fast. Callahan didn't sit. She simply lifted a photograph from her file and handed it to the clerk, who brought it to the bench. Judge Caprio studied it. Then he glanced back at Mateo. This backpack, he said, does it belong to you? No. Then whose is it? Mateo said nothing. Mr. Rivera. Still nothing. Judge Caprio's tone remained even, but there was steel in it now. The truth doesn't get louder when you lie, it just gets lonelier. I'm going to ask you again, whose backpack was in that car? Mateo's throat moved. He swallowed. His right hand came out of his hoodie pocket. It was shaking. But he still said, I don't know. A few people in the gallery let out frustrated bria. THS. Naomi Bell, the crossing guard from the footage, crossed her arms tighter over her chest. Samir Patel stared at the boy with that particular mixture of annoyance and pity business owners know too well. Evelyn Brooks looked tired more than angry, as if she had already spent too much energy on this one morning. Callahan stepped forward. Your Honor, before I call Officer Donnelly, I'd like to note that the defendant's mother, Elena Rivera, originally told police the vehicle had been taken without her knowledge. However, she later amended that statement after reviewing body cam stills. The courtroom stilled again. Judge Caprio lifted his eyes. Is Ms. Rivera present? A woman in the second row rose slowly, almost reluctantly, like standing up itself had become expensive. Elena Rivera was 34, wearing burgundy scrubs under a beige coat, dark hair tied back, face pale with exhaustion. Her hospital ID badge still clipped to her pocket read Roger Williams Medical Center. She looked like she had come straight from an overnight shift and maybe hadn't slept more than 2 hours in 2 days. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Caprio nodded gently. You may be seated for now. Mateo never turned around to look at her. That told Judge Caprio as much as anything else. Officer Lena Donnelly took the stand next. She was crisp, direct, early 40s, hair in a tight bun, one of those officers whose reports were known around the courthouse for being precise enough to irritate sloppy attorneys. She testified that dispatch first received calls at 5:43 a.m. reporting a small sedan driving erratically, striking a flower stand, nearly hitting a pedestrian, and leaving scene damage near Broad and Public. She located the Honda outside Harbor Community Pharmacy at 5:49. The engine was still running. The driver, later identified as Mateo Rivera, was alone when she approached. Alone when you approached, Marco Vega repeated on cross, not necessarily alone for the entire drive. Donnelly nodded carefully. That is correct. Did you inspect the back seat? Yes. What did you observe? A pink children's backpack, an inhaler spacer, a folded purple cardigan, and condensation on the interior rear, passenger side window consistent with recent occupancy. That landed. Callahan approached again. Officer, when you first spoke with the defendant, how would you describe his demeanor? Defensive, agitated, defiant. Did he appear under the influence? No. Did he appear frightened? Donnelly paused. At first, no, looking back, yes, but he was trying not to show it. Those last words hung there longer than most testimony does. Then came the photographs. Close-up images of broken flower buckets, bent metal rack, damaged Corolla bumper, Naomi Bell's knee swollen beneath a torn tan support brace, a hospital urgent care wristband from Samir Patel, who had cut his palm while grabbing the falling display, a repair estimate for Evelyn Brooks' car, $1,842.67, more than enough to ruin a month for someone living carefully. Judge Caprio looked through each image without rushing. "Ms. Callahan," he said, "the city is prepared to establish the damage. I understand that. But there is an unanswered question here. Why would a 13-year-old take a car before dawn?" Callahan glanced toward Mateo. "The city believes the defendant knows that answer and has not been truthful." She was right. Everybody knew she was right. What nobody knew yet was whether the reason would make things better or worse. Drop a comment telling us right now. If a child lies in court, do you think that should end any chance of mercy, or do you wait to hear why? Marco Vega rose slowly. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like a brief opportunity to speak with my client." Judge Caprio nodded. Vega leaned in close. Nobody heard what he said, but everyone saw Mateo's shoulders stiffen, then slump, then stiffen again. It went on for nearly 20 seconds. When Vega straightened, the boy's eyes were glossy, though no tears had fallen. "Mr. Rivera," Judge Caprio said, "this is the moment when you decide whether the court can help you, because I cannot help a mask. I can only help a person." Mateo looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. And still he said nothing. That was when Naomi Bell unexpectedly raised her hand from the gallery. The bailiff blinked, so did the judge. "Ma'am," Judge Caprio said. Naomi stood with a wince, favoring her left leg. She was 62, compact, strong-boned, silver hair pulled beneath a knitted cap, reflective school-crossing jacket folded over her arm. Her voice had the rough edge of somebody who had spent years outdoors calling over traffic and wind. "Your Honor, if I may, I was the one who fell." Judge Caprio nodded cautiously. "You may speak briefly." Naomi faced the bench, then the boy. "I don't know why he was driving," she said. "And I'm not excusing it. I could have broken more than a knee. There were kids on that block 20 minutes later. But when that car hit the flowers and I turned, I saw something in the back seat. I didn't know what it was then. I thought maybe a little kid ducking down." A murmur moved through the room. Naomi kept going. "And when Officer Donnelly came back later to take my full statement, I told her. So if he's gonna lie, he should know some of us already know he's lying." Mateo's face went pale. Judge Caprio watched him closely. Naomi's eyes softened, but only a little. "Baby," she said, and that one word made Mateo flinch. "Whatever you're trying to protect, it's already heavier than you." A silence fell so complete that even the heating vent seemed to stop. This was the kind of moment that turns an ordinary courtroom clip into something millions would watch and talk about. Not because it was loud, because it was true. Judge Caprio drew a slow breath. "Mr. Rivera," he said, "I'm going to give you one more chance." Mateo opened his mouth. Closed it. Then Elena Rivera stood from the gallery, without being asked. "Your Honor," she whispered, voice breaking, "it was Lucia." Every face in the room turned. Mateo spun around so fast his chair scraped. "Ma," he snapped, raw panic in his voice now, "don't." But it was too late. Elena put a hand to her mouth, trying and failing to hold herself together. "It was his little sister," she said, tears spilling now. "She was in the car." The room erupted in whispers. A 7-year-old. In that car. At 5:42 in the morning. On wet streets. With a 13-year-old driving. Judge Caprio lifted a hand for quiet, but his expression had changed. Not softer, sharper, more human somehow and more serious at the same time. "Bring Ms. Rivera forward," he said. Alina stepped carefully to the front, trembling so badly she had to grip the rail. Marco Vega closed his file. Denise Callahan lowered her pen. Officer Donnelly turned toward the mother she had briefly interviewed weeks earlier and now understood in an entirely different way. Judge Caprio spoke gently. "Ms. Rivera, take your time. Start at the beginning." Alina closed her eyes. And what she said next hit the courtroom harder than the footage ever had. She had worked the night shift on October 14 from 7:00 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., covering for a sick aide in the post-surgical wing. Her mother, Rosa Rivera, normally stayed with the children overnight in their second-floor apartment on Prairie Avenue, but Rosa had been admitted to Miriam Hospital the previous evening with chest pain. Alina's sister had promised to help and then never answered her phone. Alina said she made the worst decision of her life around midnight. She left Mateo in charge for just one night, with instructions not to open the door for anyone, not to touch the stove, and to call 911 if Lucia's breathing got bad. Lucia was 7, severe asthma, mold triggers, fall air, the works. "The nebulizer machine wasn't working right," Alina said through tears. "It kept cutting off. We've been having electrical problems. I told him to use the rescue inhaler if she needed it." Judge Caprio asked, "Did she need it?" Alina nodded, crying harder now. "At around 5, she called me from Mateo's phone saying she couldn't breathe good. I was on the floor with a patient. I told Mateo call 911. He said he would." She looked at her son then, finally. "He didn't." Judge Caprio's face remained still, but the room was changing around him. You could feel it. People were no longer deciding whether Mateo was simply reckless. They were trying to understand the shape of the fear that had put a child behind a steering wheel before sunrise. "Why not?" the judge asked. Mateo stared at the floor. Vega touched his sleeve. "Answer him." When Mateo spoke, his voice had lost all that practiced hardness. "Because last time we called, the ambulance bill came and Ma cried in the kitchen." That sentence went through the room like electricity. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended to write anything down. Alina closed both hands over her face. Judge Caprio leaned back, eyes on the boy. "How old were you when you saw that?" 9. There it was. Not arrogance. Memory. Not disrespect. Shame wearing armor. Like this video, if you believe a child can learn the wrong lesson from watching adults survive impossible choices. But Judge Caprio was not a man who mistook pain for permission. "Mr. Rivera," he said, "a bad reason for fear does not become a good reason for danger. Your sister could have been killed. Ms. Bell could have been killed. Someone crossing that street could have been killed." Mateo nodded hard, fast, unable to look at him. "I know." "Did you know then?" A long pause. "No, sir." "What did you know then?" Mateo's bottom lip shook once before he bit it still. "That she was wheezing," he said. "That her lips looked wrong. That my phone was on 4%. That Ma wasn't picking up no more. That the pharmacy opens at 6. That I thought if I just drove there and waited, I could get help." Faster. The room stayed quiet. Callahan asked the next question, but softer now. "Then why did you leave the collision scenes?" Mateo swallowed. "Because she started crying in the back, and when she cries like that she can't catch nothing. And I got scared. And then I thought if cops saw me, they'd take her away from Ma." There it was again, that child logic, terrible, dangerous, devastatingly believable. Judge Caprio looked toward Officer Donnelly. "When you stopped the vehicle, where was Lucia?" Donnelly answered carefully. "She was not present when I made contact. Later follow-up established that the defendant had dropped her at the rear employee entrance of Harbor Community Pharmacy, where pharmacist in charge Dr. Monica Shah called 911 at approximately 5:51 a.m. Now the courtroom gasped for a different reason. So Lucia had made it. But only barely. Callahan lifted another document. The city has submitted a report from Dr. Shah, Your Honor, if the court wishes to review it. Judge Caprio held out his hand. The clerk passed him the statement. He read silently for a few seconds. Then longer. Then he set it down with visible care. Dr. Shah writes, he said, that Lucia Rivera arrived in acute respiratory distress, crying, cyanotic around the lips with audible wheezing. She was treated with albuterol while EMS was en route. The gallery went dead silent. Evelyn Brooks pressed a hand to her chest. Samir Patel looked down at the floor. Naomi Bell's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back quickly, as if angry with them for appearing. All at once, the case was no longer about a boy who drove a car. It was about a boy who made the wrong choice for what may have been the most desperate reason imaginable. And yet the harm was still real. That tension was what made everyone lean in harder, because easy mercy isn't justice, and easy punishment isn't wisdom. The room knew it. Judge Caprio knew it most of all. Mr. Rivera, the judge said, why did you lie about Lucia being in the car? Mateo's breathing got shallow. Because if I told the truth, my mom could get in trouble. Would, he said, and for the first time there was anger in his voice, but not at the court, at the world. People like us always do. Nobody spoke. That line would later be replayed online more times than anyone in the room could imagine, not because it was polished, because it was naked. Judge Caprio rested his forearms on the bench. People like us, he repeated. Mateo looked up, startled by the phrasing, like he hadn't expected the judge to catch that detail. Yes, sir. What people is that? The kind where one bad week turns into one bad year, Mateo said. The kind where if your lights blink too much you pray the landlord don't raise rent. The kind where if your little sister can't breathe, you don't got time to make the perfect choice. No one in the gallery moved. No one. Judge Caprio didn't answer right away. He let the words sit. Judges who understand people know that silence can reveal more than accusation ever will. Then he said something so quietly everyone had to strain to hear it. The law cannot ignore that answer, but neither can it kneel before it. That was one of those lines you remember later in the shower, in traffic, in the middle of the night. One of those lines that sounds simple until it starts opening up inside you. The hearing should have been straightforward from there. A factual mess, yes, but still a juvenile act of reckless driving with property damage. Instead, it was only getting more complicated. Because Prosecutor Callahan had one more piece of evidence. Your Honor, she said, the city also received school attendance records and a statement from Vice Principal Terrence Hall at Gilbert Stewart Middle School. I believe the court should consider them before determining disposition. Mateo closed his eyes, briefly, like he knew exactly what was coming and hated it more than the footage. Callahan read aloud. Since late February, following the death of his father, Daniel Rivera, the defendant's attendance had deteriorated sharply. 14 unexcused absences, 8 tardies, 2 hallway altercations, 1 suspension for telling a teacher to mind her business after being found asleep during first period. However, the statement continued. Staff also observed him picking up his sister from Robert F. Kennedy Elementary multiple times each week, carrying groceries, and declining an offer to join an after-school basketball league because he needed to get home before dark. The contradiction landed hard. Bad kid. Good brother. Troubled student. Caregiver. reckless driver, child under pressure. Everybody in the room could feel the story resisting any easy label. Marco Vega rose. Your Honor, I'd like the court to hear from Mr. Hall directly, if he is present. A tall man in a brown blazer stood from the back row. Terrence Hall was maybe 45, clean beard, voice deep and patient, the kind of school Adam. In a straighter, who looked built equally for pep rallies and parent conferences. What can you tell me about Mateo Rivera? Judge Caprio asked. Hall glanced at the boy, then back to the bench. He's angry, he said. He's smart. He's embarrassed by how smart he is. He reads above grade level and acts below his age when people get too close. Since his father died in February, he's been walking around like a house fire nobody sees because the flames are inside the walls. The entire courtroom went still again. Hall continued. I'm not here to excuse what he did. He scared people. Somebody got hurt. Property got damaged. But I'll tell you something else. The same week he got suspended, our cafeteria cashier noticed he stopped buying lunch. We found out he was taking his sandwich home in napkins for his sister because their SNAP benefits hadn't reloaded yet. Mateo's head dropped. Elena let out a sound that was half sob, half apology to the whole room. Terrence Hall didn't dramatize it. That made it worse. He doesn't trust adults, Hall said. Not because he's evil, because life keeps teaching him that by the time adults arrive, the bill already came due. Judge Caprio looked back at Mateo. Is that true? Mateo shrugged weakly. I guess. No, the judge said. Don't hide in that word, is it true? A longer pause. Yes. The room had fully shifted by now, but not all the way toward sympathy. There was still Naomi's injured knee, still Evelyn's damaged car, still Samir's cut hand and ruined display, still the simple fact that a 13-year-old had driven through a city street in the rain because he decided his fear mattered more than everybody else's safety. That tension was exactly why millions would later talk about this case. Everyone in the room knew it. You could almost feel the future commentary forming. Was he brave or reckless? Should mercy have limits? At what age does survival stop excusing bad decisions? What do we owe a child who learned responsibility before he learned algebra? Before the room could settle, Callahan delivered the next twist. Your Honor, she said, one of the affected parties wishes to address the court. Which one? Ms. Evelyn Brooks. The woman in the third row stood carefully. Evelyn Brooks was 61, a pediatric nurse with soft brown eyes, a navy raincoat, and the posture of someone who had spent decades leaning over other people's pain without asking anyone to look at her own. Her damaged Toyota was her only car, used to drive from Providence to Hasbro Children's Hospital 3 days a week. Ms. Brooks, Judge Caprio said, you may speak. She clasped her hands. When my car got hit, I was furious, she said. I'm still not exactly delighted, Your Honor. My insurance deductible is $600. I missed a shift because the mirror was hanging loose and the shop couldn't take me until afternoon. And on a nurse's paycheck, $600 matters. She looked at Mateo. But when I heard there was a little girl in respiratory distress, something in me shifted. Mateo finally met her eyes. She continued. I've worked pediatrics for 36 years. I know what panic sounds like when it enters a house before sunrise. I know the look of an older sibling who thinks it's his job to become an adult in 5 seconds. I've seen boys younger than you signing forms because nobody else made it to the hospital in time. A few tears appeared in the gallery. A woman near the aisle wiped her cheek quickly. Evelyn took a breath. That does not make what you did acceptable. It does make it understandable, and there is a difference. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. That is a wise distinction. She looked back to the bench. I don't want him crushed, Your Honor. I want him corrected. There's a difference there, too. That line drew a murmur of agreement from the gallery. If you believe justice should correct, not just crush, hit that subscribe button right now, because this hearing was about to become something even bigger than a ruling. Samir Patel spoke next. He was 48, owner of Patel Family Market, a neighborhood store with lottery tickets, flowers near the entrance, and the kind of counter where half the block came to complain about weather, prices, and the Patriots. He held his bandaged palm awkwardly against the rail as he addressed the bench. I lost $432 in inventory, Your Honor. Buckets, flowers, metal rack, and a busy morning because I spent it talking to police instead of opening on time. My hand needed 6 stitches. So no, I was not feeling charitable. A few people laughed nervously at his bluntness. Samir shrugged. But my wife watched the footage at home and asked me something I couldn't answer. She said, "If our son thought I couldn't breathe and made the worst decision of his life to get me help, would you want the court to see only the damage and not the fear?" He looked toward Mateo. "So I came here to say this. I need him to understand what he did cost real people. But if the court gives him a way to work that debt off, I'd rather have his time than his punishment." That landed like a bell. Judge Caprio wrote something down. Naomi Bell was the last of the 3 to speak again, and when she did, the whole room leaned forward because there was something about her voice that made people listen even when she didn't speak loudly. "Your Honor, I cross kids on that corner every morning. Rich kids, poor kids, loud kids, sleepy kids, babies with backpacks bigger than their torsos. I have seen what happens when grown folks in a hurry act like the street belongs to them, so I was mad, real mad." She turned to Mateo fully. "And I'm still mad. No sugarcoating, no Saint Act, just truth. But when I heard why, I remembered something. Back when his father Daniel was a boy, I worked the same block. He used to walk his little sisters to school. One day I told him, 'You keep acting like a grown man before your time.' He smiled and said, 'Somebody gotta do it.'" Mateo's face broke open with surprise, genuine surprise. Maybe he had never known anyone else remembered his father as a child. Naomi's eyes softened. "Your daddy said that at 11 years old. So when I saw your face today, all hard and scared and trying to hold the whole world on your back, I thought, Lord, the pattern came back again." Elena was openly crying now. Naomi nodded once toward the judge. "I don't want vengeance. I want interruption. Somebody needs to break this pattern before his little sister learns to call chaos normal." That sentence changed the room. Not vengeance. Interruption. It was the kind of phrase people later wrote in comments, on clips, in captions, under headlines, because it said everything the case had become in just 2 words. Judge Caprio sat very still for several seconds. Then he said, "Mr. Rivera, come closer to the bench." The boy froze. Marco Vega whispered something. Mateo moved slowly, like each step had weight tied to it. He stopped just below the bench rail, close enough now for everyone to see how young he really was. The scab on his knuckle, the eyelashes wet with unshed tears, the way his hoodie sleeves covered part of his hands like he wanted to disappear inside them. Judge Caprio lowered his voice. "Look at me." Mateo did. "What happened to your father?" The question was so direct it almost felt unfair. But Judge Caprio asked it like a man who already knew that this was not a detour from the truth. It was the road to it. Mateo answered with difficulty. "He died in February." "How?" "Asthma attack." The courtroom went silent in a new way, deeper, heavier, like all the air had become aware of itself. Judge Caprio's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "How old was he?" 37. "Where were you?" "At home." "Did you call 911? Mateo nodded. "Did they come?" "Yes, sir." "Did he survive the ride?" Mateo shook his head. No. That was the moment everything snapped into terrible focus. The ambulance bill, the panic, the little girl wheezing before dawn, the boy behind the wheel, the lie, the armor, the fear of waiting, the fear of officials, the fear of losing one more person to a delay he couldn't control. It didn't erase the damage, but it explained the speed. Everybody in that room knew it. The old man in the Red Sox cap took off his hat. The law student stopped writing. Denise Callahan pressed her lips together and looked down. Even Officer Donnelly, who had seen enough to protect herself from surprise, exhaled like she had just found the missing piece to a picture she hadn't wanted to imagine. Judge Caprio spoke carefully. So when your sister began having trouble breathing. Mateo finished the sentence for him. I thought if I waited she'd die too. No theatrics, no swelling music, no grandstanding. Just a child telling the truth too late. The courtroom cracked. A woman in the gallery sobbed once. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice said, "That poor kid." But nobody said it too loudly because everybody could still see Naomi's knee brace, Samir's bandaged palm, the photos on the evidence table. Compassion had entered the room. It had not erased responsibility, and that was exactly what made this moment so powerful. Like this video, if you've ever seen a child carrying fear too big for his age. Because Judge Caprio's next words hit with the force of a verdict and the tenderness of a warning. Mateo, he said, using the boy's first name for the first time, listen to me carefully. Pain can explain a decision. It cannot excuse a danger. Your father's death wounded you. It did not give you a license to put other lives at risk. Mateo nodded, tears finally spilling now. I know. No, you know now, that's different. Another line people would replay later. Another quote that stayed. Judge Caprio continued. The strongest words in any courtroom are not "I'm scared," not "I'm sorry," not even "I didn't mean to." The strongest words are, "I was wrong, can you say them?" Mateo's chest shook. I was wrong. Again. I was wrong. Louder, not for me, for the people you harmed. Mateo turned, just slightly enough to face the gallery where Naomi, Samir, and Evelyn sat. I was wrong, he said, voice cracking. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. And everyone in the room knew the difference. Callahan asked to approach. Judge Caprio allowed it. She handed up one more document, a copy of the EMS run report and emergency room intake summary from Rhode Island Hospital. Lucia Rivera, age 7. Arrival 6:12 a.m. acute asthma exacerbation. Early intervention likely prevented further decline. Judge Caprio read it, set it down. Then he looked at Elena Rivera. Ms. Rivera, this court is not blind to the circumstances in your home, but leaving a 13-year-old solely responsible for a medically fragile child overnight is unacceptable. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. Have the Department of Children, Youth, and Families been contacted? Callahan answered. A referral was reviewed and screened for supportive services rather than removal, Your Honor, given the medical emergency and absence of intentional neglect. The family has been referred for housing and utility stabilization review. Good, practical, real. No cartoon villain system, no magical rescue. Just one overburdened family caught where poverty, grief, and bad options meet. But the hearing still wasn't near finished, because Judge Caprio now had to decide what justice meant. And everybody in the room knew this was the point where he could either turn the case into a warning or into a bridge. He asked Marco Vega for recommendation. Vega stood. Your Honor, Mr. Rivera does not need leniency without structure. He needs accountability tied to repair, community service with Mr. Patel if he consents, written apologies to all affected parties, mandatory grief counseling, school attendance compliance, and no contact with any vehicle other than as a passenger until he is legally licensed many years from now. A few restrained chuckles moved through the room at that last line. Even the tension had to breathe. Callahan followed. The city agrees in part. Given the seriousness of the driving and the risk involved, the court should impose a formal juvenile diversion order with measurable benchmarks and consequences for noncompliance. Judge Caprio nodded. Then he surprised everybody. "Mr. Rivera," he said, "before I decide anything, I want to hear from you. Not the angry version, not the smart-mouth version, not the version trying to protect your mother. The real version. Why should this court show you mercy?" That was the question. The whole room knew it. The bailiff stopped shifting his weight. The clerk lowered her pen. A camera operator in the back slowly adjusted his focus. Even the rain outside seemed quieter against the windows. Mateo stared at the floor for 3 seconds. 5, 8. When he finally spoke, his voice was so small people had to lean in. "Because if you only punish me," he said, "then all I learn is that being scared makes you alone." No one moved. He kept going. "And I know I did wrong. I know that. I know Ms. Bell got hurt. I know Mr. Patel got cut. I know I messed up Ms. Brooks' car and her job. I know I could have got my sister killed too. I know all that." His breathing hitched. "But I'm asking you not to throw me away for the worst 7 minutes of my life." The room broke again. Tears appeared openly now, not everywhere, but enough. Mateo wiped his face with the heel of his hand, embarrassed and furious at himself for crying, which somehow made it worse to watch. "My dad died because I waited for grown-ups to fix something I couldn't fix," he said. "That morning I thought waiting was the same as losing. I know now it ain't. I know now I was wrong. But if you lock me in that wrong forever, then what am I supposed to become after that?" Nobody spoke. Not a sound. Then came the line that would travel farther than anyone in that courthouse could have predicted. "I wasn't trying to be a man," Mateo said. "I was trying not to be an orphan twice." There are moments when a room full of strangers becomes one body, one breath, one pulse. This was one of those moments. Naomi Bell sat down hard, covering her mouth. Evelyn Brooks cried without hiding it now. Samir Patel looked away and blinked rapidly. Elena Rivera nearly collapsed into the bench behind her. Judge Caprio removed his glasses, not dramatically, just slowly, because sometimes even judges need a second to look at the world without a barrier between them. If you believe mercy is strongest when it looks pain in the eye and still demands responsibility, like this video now. Because what Judge Caprio said next was the turning point. "Mateo," he said quietly, "that may be one of the most honest things I've ever heard from this podium." The boy cried harder. "But honesty," the judge continued, "must arrive before. Disaster next time, not after. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "You are 13. The world has asked too much of you already. But that does not mean you get to ask the road, the law, or other innocent people to carry your fear for you. A mistake can fit inside 1 minute. Its consequences can live for years." Another line, another truth that settled deep. Judge Caprio leaned forward again. "Mercy is not when the court forgets the damage. Mercy is when the court remembers the child. I am willing to remember both." That was the climax, the point where justice and compassion stopped circling each other and finally stood in the same place. But the hearing still had one more twist. Because just when it seemed the court had heard everything, Elena Rivera asked if she could speak once more. Judge Caprio allowed it. She reached into her bag with shaking hands and produced a folded envelope, worn at the edges like it had been opened and closed too many times. "This was in Mateo's room," she said. "I found it after the police came. I didn't know if I should bring it, but I think maybe the court should hear it." Marco Vega took the envelope, glanced inside, then handed it to the clerk for the judge. Judge Caprio unfolded a sheet of lined notebook paper, written in uneven dark pencil. It was not addressed to the court. It was addressed to Daniel, to Mateo's dead father. The entire room tensed. Judge Caprio asked quietly, "May I read this aloud?" Elena nodded. Mateo looked horrified. "No, ma." Then softer, "Please." But Judge Caprio looked at him with a compassion that had no softness in it now. Sometimes dignity means being seen completely. "Is this your handwriting, Mateo?" "Yes." "Then I'm asking you, should I read it?" A long pause. Mateo's shoulders shook. "If you want." Judge Caprio read. "Dad, Lucia started wheezing tonight and the machine is acting stupid again. Ma says she got it, but I don't think she do. I know you told me not to act grown because grown gets tired and mean. But there ain't nobody else here tonight. If something happens, I'm going to do whatever I got to do, even if it's dumb. I'd rather get yelled at than bury somebody else." The room shattered. There is no other word for it. Gasps, tears. One woman stood up and had to sit back down. The bailiff looked away. Officer Donnelly closed her eyes. Denise Callahan pressed a tissue beneath one lens of her glasses so carefully it somehow made the moment even harder to watch. And Mateo, who had spent the whole morning acting older than 13, suddenly looked exactly 13. 13 and exhausted and terrified and ashamed and still somehow standing. That was the unexpected twist. Not a hidden witness, not a secret legal loophole. A child's private letter to a dead father, revealing that the worst decision of his life had been forming long before the ignition turned. Everyone in the room knew then that this was not a story about a delinquent thrill ride. It was a story about a boy cornered by grief, debt, memory, and responsibility, making a catastrophic choice in a moment when he believed catastrophe had already arrived. And still the harm remained. That was why the hearing mattered. Because true justice has to hold both truths at once. Drop a comment telling us the exact moment your heart changed in this story. Was it the inhaler, the father's death, or that letter? Judge Caprio refolded the paper carefully and handed it back. "Mr. Rivera," he said, "I want you to listen very closely. What you wrote there tells me two things. First, you love your sister deeply. Second, you were drowning alone before that morning ever came." Mateo nodded, crying too hard to speak. "Children are not supposed to become emergency plans," the judge said. "That is not strength. That is abandonment disguised as necessity. But once you are put in that position, you still must choose wisely. You did not." Mateo whispered, "I know." Judge Caprio looked toward Elena. "And Ms. Rivera, I say this with compassion but also with firmness. Your son has been carrying a burden that belongs to grown people. That must end today." Elena nodded through tears. "It will, Your Honor." Judge Caprio turned to the affected parties. "Ms. Bell, Mr. Patel, Ms. Brooks, I want the record to reflect that your responses here today honor both your own injuries and the humanity of this child. That is no small thing." Naomi sniffed and nodded. Samir murmured, "Thank you, Judge." Evelyn simply pressed a tissue to her eyes. Then Judge Caprio began to rule. He dismissed no facts. He minimized nothing. He went charge by charge, explaining in plain language what each meant and why it mattered. Operating without a license, reckless driving, failure to stop after causing damage. He told Mateo that had an adult committed the same acts under less compelling circumstances, the financial penalties alone would have been crushing, and if anyone had suffered serious injury, far worse consequences would have followed. But, he said, the law also recognizes age, context, intent, and capacity for rehabilitation. He imposed 12 months of juvenile diversion supervision with no formal adjudication if successfully completed. 50 hours of structured community service, 20 of them at Patel Family Market if Mr. Patel remained willing, focused not on humiliation but restoration. Weekly school attendance checks with Vice Principal Hall. Mandatory grief counseling and family services participation. Written apology letters, but not generic ones. Specific ones, naming what each person lost. A reflective essay titled, in Judge Caprio's own words, What Fear Can Never Be Allowed to Drive. And most importantly, a standing order that any future medical emergency in the Rivera home would be routed through community health services arranged by the court liaison, so that no child would again make a decision with death in one hand and unpaid bills in the other. It was practical, tough, humane, smart. Then came the part nobody expected. The cost of the property damage, Judge Caprio said, will not be placed directly on this child as a crushing debt. Instead, restitution will be addressed through insurance, victim compensation channels, and service-based repair where appropriate. A 13-year-old should learn that actions have consequences. He should not learn that one morning of terror means financial hopelessness forever. The gallery murmured approval, not loud but enough. Callahan nodded. Vega exhaled with visible relief. And Mateo stood frozen, like he could not tell whether he had just been spared or sentenced or both. Judge Caprio looked directly at him. You asked me for mercy. I am giving you something better. Mateo blinked through tears. A path, the judge said. Another quote. Another line that would be clipped, repeated, shared, argued over, and remembered. But hear me carefully, he continued. Mercy without change is just delay. I am not delaying your future. I am demanding it. At that, something broke fully inside Mateo. He covered his face. His shoulders folded in. Marco Vega put a hand on his back, and the boy did not shrug it off. Elena stepped forward instinctively and stopped when the bailiff lifted a hand. Then Judge Caprio nodded for her to come. She reached her son and wrapped him in both arms. He stayed stiff for half a second. Then melted. The entire courtroom watched a child stop, pretending not to need his mother. It was not a perfect image. Nothing about the morning was perfect. Her mascara was smudged. His hoodie was wet at the cuffs. They were both shaking. But that imperfection was exactly why the scene would later hit people so hard. It looked like real life. Messy, late, damaged, but still trying. Share this with someone who thinks a courtroom can never be a place of healing. Sometimes the strongest verdict is the one that leaves room for a person to become more than their worst decision. Most viral clips would have ended there. A sentence, tears, a hug, a wise quote fade out, but this story didn't stop in that room. Because real transformation has to survive after the cameras leave. 3 weeks later, on a windy Thursday afternoon, Samir Patel stood outside his market on Broad Street, arms crossed, pretending not to watch too closely as Mateo Rivera fumbled with a stack of flower buckets. The boy wore a gray Providence Youth Program t-shirt, old work gloves, and the same scuffed Jordans, now dirtier. He looked less defensive and more awkward, which was probably progress. Not like that, Samir called. If you stack the mums crooked, they bruise. Mateo adjusted them, too fast. Samir sighed. You're still driving flowers like you drove the car. That got the faintest almost smile out of Mateo. Almost. He had been showing up every Tuesday and Thursday after school for 3 weeks, sweeping the sidewalk, restocking coolers, unloading beverage crates, learning which stems broke easy and which ones bent before snapping. The first day he barely spoke. The second day he said, "My bad" 9 times and "sorry" 0. By the 5th visit, Samir made him handle the register for exact cash under supervision because, as Samir put it, you need to learn what people work for before you learn what it costs when you ruin it. One afternoon, Naomi Bell came limping over on her break with a cup of Dunkin' coffee and watched Mateo carry a fresh flower rack into place. "How's the knee?" he asked her without looking up. "How's the judgment?" she asked back. He gave a one-shoulder shrug. Better. Good, she said, because mine ain't all the way either. That was Naomi, Grace with elbows. At school, Terrence Hall kept the attendance sheet like it was a scoreboard. Mateo missed no days in November. He turned in the reflective essay 4 days early. It was handwritten, 7 pages long. Hall later told the court liaison it was one of the best pieces of writing he'd ever seen from a middle schooler. No. Polished, not pretty but honest. In one line, Mateo wrote, "Fear is a bad driver because it only sees the cliff and never the people on the road." Judge Caprio had a copy by December. At home, things changed more slowly. Utility assistants finally stabilized the electrical issues. A community health worker helped Alina apply for a replacement nebulizer, mold inspection, and emergency pharmacy access. Lucia's asthma plan was printed and taped to the refrigerator with color-coded steps. Green, yellow, red, call, nebulizer, inhaler, emergency room, ambulance. No guessing, no improvising, no 13-year-old commander of chaos. It should have felt like relief. Instead, the first week it felt strange. One night Alina found Mateo standing in the kitchen at 2:11 a.m., fully awake, staring at the fridge. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He shrugged, checking if she's breathing. That was the part people online rarely understand when they talk about redemption like it's a montage. The hardest part is not the ruling. It's the aftermath. The nervous system that still thinks disaster is 5 minutes away. The child who was told he doesn't have to be the adult anymore and then doesn't know how to stand down. Grief counseling started in a low building off Elmwood Avenue, with a therapist named Dr. Hannah Sloan who wore plain cardigans, never rushed silences, and once told Mateo, "You are not responsible for every person you love staying alive. That's too heavy a job for a grown man, never mind a boy." He cried in her office the first time she said it, not because he believed her, because he wanted to. Meanwhile, the clip from court spread. First locally, then farther. A short excerpt of Mateo saying, "I wasn't trying to be a man. I was trying not to be an orphan twice," was posted by a Courtroom account that usually specialized in ticket dismissals and funny exchanges. Within 48 hours, it had 500,000 views. By the weekend, it crossed 5 million across platforms. Comment sections split into camps and then twisted into something more complicated. Some called it reckless. Some called it brave. Some said the mother should have been charged. Others said anyone judging had never watched poverty turn every emergency into a math problem. Teachers shared it. Nurses shared it. Public defenders shared it. Parents watched it after putting their kids to bed and sat in the dark thinking about every bad decision they had ever made while scared. And most of them agreed on one thing. They would never forget that boy's face when Judge Caprio told him, "I am giving you something better, a path." Like this video, if you believe stories go viral for a reason. Sometimes millions don't share a moment because it's outrageous. They share it because it tells the truth about something society keeps pretending not to see. By January, 4 months after the hearing, the court scheduled Mateo's first compliance review. No camera crews were promised. No viral expectation. Just follow-up. Those hearings tell you whether justice worked. At 8:56 a.m., Mateo walked back into Courtroom 3, taller somehow, not physically maybe, but differently. He wore a navy button-down from Target, black slacks a little short at the ankle, and sneakers so clean they were clearly not his work pair. His hair was freshly cut. Lucia sat in the gallery this time beside Alina, wearing a purple puffer jacket and swinging her feet above the floor. She had a backpack with a butterfly keychain again, but this time it hung from her own shoulder, not abandoned in the back seat of a crime scene. Samir Patel was there too. So was Terrence Hall. Naomi Bell came late because of icy sidewalks and entered just before the case was called, muttering about winter and municipal budgets. Judge Caprio looked down, saw Mateo, and smiled without making too much of it. Mr. Rivera, he said, you seem older. Mateo answered, I feel tired. The courtroom laughed softly. Judge Caprio pointed a finger. Be careful, that's how adulthood begins. Even Mateo smiled at that, small but real. The reports were strong, attendance good, counseling consistent, no further incidents, community service nearly complete, apology letters submitted and accepted. Samir's evaluation described Mateo as stubborn, early, teachable, and surprisingly good with carnations. Naomi's statement said, he now says good morning loud enough for the dead to hear, which I consider progress. Evelyn Brooks wrote that Mateo had volunteered twice at a children's coat drive sponsored by the hospital, and that she personally watched him help a frightened 6-year-old choose mittens, with more patience than some adults bring to medicine. Judge Caprio reviewed each page. Then he lifted a final envelope. This, he said, is a letter addressed to the court, written by Mateo Rivera. Would you like to read it yourself, or shall I? Mateo glanced at Lucia, then back at the bench. I'll read it. He took the letter. With hands steadier than before, the room quieted. Dear Judge Caprio, he read, I thought mercy meant getting out of trouble. Now I think mercy means somebody believes you can still become the person your mistake tried to bury. I hated coming here. Then I hated myself for needing to come here. But working at Mr. Patel's store taught me that damage is slow to fix when it belongs to somebody else. Counseling taught me my father dying is not a timer counting down on everybody I love. Ms. Bell taught me pain can still tell the truth. Ms. Brooks taught me being understood is not the same as being excused. My mom is trying. I am trying too. Lucia says I don't yell when she coughs anymore. That's probably the biggest progress. I don't know if I deserve a second chance. I only know I don't want to waste one. By the time he finished, Judge Caprio wasn't the only one blinking hard. Lucia whispered loudly from the gallery, you still yell a little. The room burst into laughter. Even Mateo laughed, embarrassed. Even Alina laughed through tears. Even Naomi slapped her knee and said, children keep the record straight. That laugh mattered more than people think. After so much heaviness, it proved something had shifted from pure survival toward ordinary life again, toward teasing, toward breathing, toward family. Judge Caprio smiled. Lucia, thank you for your candor. She nodded solemnly like a tiny witness, protecting the integrity of the court. Then Judge Caprio grew serious again. Mr. Rivera, he said, do you know why I ordered follow-up instead of just sympathy? Yes, sir. Tell me. Because people clap for a sad story and then forget the work part. The judge nodded once. Correct. That line, too, became shareable later, because it was true, too true. Judge Caprio leaned forward. You did the work part, not all of it. Nobody finishes growing at 13, but enough that this court can say with confidence that the path was not wasted. Then he formally acknowledged successful compliance to date and indicated that, if final benchmarks were completed by spring, the matter would close without delinquency adjudication. Lucia clapped once before Alina gently lowered her hand. Everyone smiled. But there was still one more thing. Naomi Bell asked if she could say something, again. Judge Caprio grinned. Ms. Bell, this court has learned that when you ask that question, I should probably say yes. Naomi approached the rail, winter scarf still on. I just want to put one thing on the record, she said. A lot of folks online talked about this boy like he was either a saint or a menace. That's lazy thinking. He was a child under pressure who made a dangerous mistake. Then he told the truth. Then he accepted correction. That matters. She pointed gently toward Mateo. Baby, don't let being forgiven make you foolish. Let it make you useful. That was Naomi. Every sentence sounded carved. Mateo nodded. Yes, ma'am. Samir Patel followed with fewer words. He's still terrible at stacking mums, he said, but he apologizes faster now. Laughter again. Then Evelyn Brooks stood from the gallery and held up a small envelope. "Your Honor, if I may, I have something for Lucia." The judge looked amused and touched. "If it's appropriate." "It is." Evelyn walked over and handed the envelope to Alina, who opened it. Inside was a gift card to a children's bookstore and a handwritten note, "For the bravest little patient who wasn't even in the hospital where I work." Lucia looked confused. "Can I get dragon books?" "You can get dragon books," Evelyn said. That small exchange brought fresh tears for reasons nobody could fully explain. Maybe because kindness offered after harm is one of the few things in life that still feels.